I sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Associates law firm, watching my father, Gerald, demand I sign over my $6.3 million Manhattan penthouse to my golden child brother, Marcus. When I refused, Gerald's palm cracked against my cheek in front of 12 witnesses. The estate lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, set down his coffee cup and stared at Gerald with an expression that made the room go silent. "Sir, do you actually know who owns that $10 million mansion you've been living in for the past 15 years? My name is Caitlin, and I never expected my grandmother Eleanor's funeral to lead to the most shocking day of my life. Growing up, I was always the family disappointment, the one who asked too many questions and refused to fall in line with my father's unrealistic expectations. While my brother Marcus coasted through life without consequence, I worked myself through college and built a successful career as an architectural engineer in Boston. The relationship between my father and me had been strained since my mother Sarah died when I was 8 years old. Gerald remarried Linda 2 years later, a woman who treated me with polite indifference at best and outright hostility at worst. She made it clear that I was a reminder of Gerald's first marriage, something inconvenient that needed to be tolerated rather than embraced. Marcus, now 32, had never held a steady job in his life. He drifted from one failed venture to another, always with Gerald's financial backing and emotional support. Linda treated him like her own son, showering him with praise for the smallest accomplishments while my achievements went largely unnoticed. When grandmother Eleanor passed away at 91, I flew in from Boston expecting a simple funeral service and maybe a small inheritance. Eleanor had always been kind to me, but she was Gerald's mother and family loyalty typically followed traditional lines. I assumed Marcus would inherit the bulk of her estate as he had been living in the family's Westchester mansion, helping to care for her final years. The law office of Sterling and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Mr. Pemberton, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, had been Eleanor's attorney for over 20 years. The conference room felt formal and intimidating with its dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Gerald arrived wearing his best charcoal suit, the one he reserved for important occasions. Linda accompanied him in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Marcus slouched in, wearing khakis and a polo shirt, apparently considering this just another family meeting rather than a formal legal proceeding. Two of Eleanor's longtime friends, Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen, were present as witnesses, along with Eleanor's housekeeper, Maria, her physical therapist, David, and several other estate witnesses I didn't recognize. The formal atmosphere suggested this wasn't going to be a simple reading. Mr. Pemberton began by expressing condolences and explaining the legal process. He opened Eleanor's thick will document and began reading the preliminary sections about funeral arrangements and personal effects. Eleanor had been methodical about everything, down to specifying which china set should go to which church auxiliary. The monetary bequests started small: $25,000 to the American Cancer Society, $15,000 to the local animal shelter, $10,000 each to Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen for their decades of friendship, $50,000 to Linda, which seemed generous considering Linda had only been family for about 20 years. Then came $75,000 to Marcus, along with Eleanor's antique car collection. Marcus smiled and nodded clearly, expecting this was just the beginning of a much larger inheritance. Gerald patted his shoulder approvingly, already counting money that wasn't yet distributed. Mr. Pemberton paused, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at me. To my granddaughter, Caitlin, who has shown remarkable strength and independence despite facing numerous challenges, I leave my Manhattan penthouse located at Fifth Avenue, valued at $6.3 million, along with all furnishings and contents therein. The room went completely silent. I felt my face flush as everyone stared at me in shock. $6.3 million. A Manhattan penthouse. I had been expecting maybe a few $1,000s and some jewelry. Gerald's face turned red and his hands clenched into fists on the table. That's impossible. Mother was clearly not thinking straight in her final months. Caitlin doesn't need that kind of money. She has her little engineering job. Marcus is the one who needs support, who deserves the family wealth. Linda's mouth hung open as she processed the numbers. Marcus looked like someone had just told him Santa Claus wasn't real. The other witnesses shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Pemberton. Gerald continued, his voice rising. Surely there's been some mistake. My mother always talked about leaving everything to Marcus. He's been caring for her, living in the family home, making sacrifices. Mr. Pemberton remained calm and professional. Mr. Henderson, I can assure you there has been no mistake. Your mother was of completely sound mind when she updated this will 6 months ago. She specifically requested multiple witnesses and psychological evaluations to ensure there could be no questions about her mental capacity. Gerald turned to me, his eyes blazing with fury. Caitlin, you need to do the right thing here. Sign that penthouse over to Marcus. He's family, he's struggled. He deserves a real chance at success. You're young, you're smart, you can make your own way. I felt every eye in the room on me. The same family dynamic that had played out my entire life was happening again, with everyone expecting me to sacrifice for Marcus's benefit. But this time was different. This was Eleanor's decision, her money, her choice about who deserved what. No, I said quietly but firmly. I'm not signing anything over to anyone. Gerald's face went from red to purple. What did you say to me? I said no. If Eleanor wanted Marcus to have the penthouse, she would have left it to him. She didn't. She left it to me. That's when Gerald lost complete control. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and before anyone could react, he slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed through the quiet conference room like a gunshot. My cheek stung and I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. Mrs. Patterson gasped audibly. Maria crossed herself and muttered something in Spanish. The other witnesses looked horrified that they had just seen a man strike his adult daughter in front of a room full of people. But it was Mr. Pemberton's reaction that made everyone freeze. He slowly set down his coffee cup, removed his glasses, and stared at Gerald with an expression I had never seen before. It was the look of someone who knew a secret that was about to change everything. Sir, Mr. Pemberton said in a voice that was perfectly calm but somehow terrifying, do you actually know who owns that $10 million mansion you've been living in for the past 15 years? Gerald froze mid-sip of his water, his face going completely white. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire everyone could smell, but couldn't yet see. Gerald's hand trembled as he set down his water glass, and I watched 20 years of assumed confidence drain from his face in real time. Mr. Pemberton reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder that looked like it had been waiting for this exact moment. The tab read, Henderson Property Trust, confidential, in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. Let me clarify the ownership situation for everyone present, Mr. Pemberton said, opening the folder with deliberate precision. The Westchester Mansion at 12 Oak Ridge Drive, currently valued at approximately $10 million, was purchased in 2008 entirely with funds from Eleanor Henderson's personal accounts. Linda's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the confusion spreading across her features. She had married Gerald in 2010, believing she was joining a wealthy family with substantial real estate holdings. The property was placed in an irrevocable trust. Mr. Pemberton continued, with Gerald Henderson named as the beneficiary caretaker, not the owner. The trust agreement which I have here specifies that Mr. Henderson could live in the property and maintain it, but he never possessed actual ownership rights. Gerald's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's ridiculous. Mother told me the house was mine. I've been paying the maintenance, the property taxes, the utilities for 15 years. Actually, Mr. Pemberton said, consulting another document, The trust has been paying all property-related expenses through an automatic withdrawal system from Eleanor's accounts. You haven't personally paid a utility bill or property tax installment since 2008. The room felt like it was tilting. I had grown up believing my father was a successful businessman who owned valuable real estate. Every family gathering, every holiday celebration, every moment of Marcus's privileged upbringing had been funded by Eleanor's money, not Gerald's wealth. Mr. Pemberton pulled out a thick stack of financial records. These documents tell quite a story about the period following Sarah Henderson's death in 2003. Gerald, would you like to explain to your daughter what your financial situation was at that time? Gerald's face had gone from white to gray. I don't see how that's relevant to anything. It's extremely relevant, Mr. Pemberton replied, because it explains why Eleanor made the decisions she did. He turned to address the room. In 2003, Gerald Henderson was approximately $400,000 in debt due to gambling losses and failed business ventures. His home was in foreclosure, his credit cards were maxed out, and he was facing potential bankruptcy. I felt like I was learning about a stranger, not my father. Gerald had always presented himself as financially successful, someone who made smart business decisions and provided well for his family. Eleanor paid off all of Gerald's debts, Mr. Pemberton continued, and purchased the Westchester mansion to ensure family stability, particularly for young Caitlin, who had just lost her mother. However, Eleanor was concerned about Gerald's financial judgment, so she structured everything as a trust rather than an outright gift. Linda was staring at Gerald like she was seeing him for the first time. You told me you owned that house free and clear. You said it was your inheritance from your first marriage. The property was Eleanor's attempt to provide security. Mr. Pemberton explained, while protecting the family assets from Gerald's gambling addiction and poor financial decisions. Marcus looked like someone had just told him he was adopted. His entire sense of identity was built around being the heir to family wealth that apparently didn't belong to his father in the first place. But Mr. Pemberton wasn't finished. He pulled out another folder, this one labeled Sarah Henderson Memorial Trust. This brings us to an even more serious matter, he said, his tone becoming grave. Sarah Henderson established a trust fund for her daughter Caitlin before her death in 2003. The fund was intended to cover Caitlin's education living expenses and provide financial security through her young adult years. My heart started racing. My mother had left money specifically for me. I had never heard anything about this. The trust contained approximately $300,000 at the time of Sarah's death, with instructions that it be managed conservatively and used for Caitlin's benefit. Gerald was named as the trustee with Eleanor as the backup trustee. Gerald's hands were shaking now. He knew what was coming. Bank records show that between 2004 and 2015, virtually all funds from Sarah's trust were withdrawn by Gerald Henderson for purposes unrelated to Caitlin's welfare. The words hit me like physical blows. My mother had tried to take care of me even knowing she was dying, and Gerald had stolen that security from me. The money was used for Marcus's private school tuition, family vacations, Linda's shopping expenses, and Gerald's continuing gambling activities. None of it went toward Caitlin's education or welfare, as Sarah had intended. I thought about all the times I'd worked multiple jobs to pay for college, all the nights I ate ramen noodles because I couldn't afford groceries, all the stress and financial pressure I had endured, while Marcus lived comfortably without working. This represents a clear violation of fiduciary duty, Mr. Pemberton said, and potentially criminal misappropriation of trust funds. Gerald finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. I used that money for family expenses. Caitlin benefited from living in the house, eating the food, being part of the family. The trust was specifically designated for Caitlin's individual benefit, Mr. Pemberton replied. Using it for general family expenses or for Marcus's exclusive benefit constitutes theft. Linda was staring at Gerald with growing horror. She was realizing that her comfortable lifestyle had been funded by stolen money from a dead woman's attempt to care for her daughter. Mrs. Patterson spoke up for the first time. Eleanor knew about this. Mr. Pemberton nodded grimly. Eleanor discovered the trust fund violations in 2015 when she took over as backup trustee. She spent the last 8 years of her life carefully documenting Gerald's financial misconduct and planning how to restore justice for Caitlin. The second major twist was becoming clear. Not only had Eleanor left me a massive inheritance, but she had done it knowing that my father had been stealing from me for over a decade. This wasn't just generosity, it was restitution. The $6.3 million penthouse, Mr. Pemberton continued, represents Eleanor's attempt to restore what Caitlin should have had, plus reasonable growth and compensation for the years of financial abuse she endured. Gerald slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. The man I had grown up fearing and trying to please was nothing more than a thief and a liar who had built his family's lifestyle on stolen money and his mother's charity. "There's more," Mr. Pemberton said, reaching for yet another folder. Mr. Pemberton's next folder was thicker than the others, bound with a red ribbon that suggested its contents were particularly serious. The label read, "Estate Violations and Criminal Evidence." Eleanor's will doesn't just redistribute her assets, he announced to the increasingly tense room. It also terminates all financial arrangements that have been supporting the Henderson family lifestyle. Gerald sat up straighter, suddenly realizing that his problems were just beginning, not ending. Effective immediately. Mr. Pemberton continued reading from the legal document. All access to Eleanor Henderson trust accounts is revoked for Gerald Henderson and his dependents. This includes the monthly allowance of $8,000 that has been automatically deposited into Gerald's personal accounts for the past 15 years. Linda's face went completely white. $8,000 a month was $96,000 a year, in essentially free money that Gerald had never mentioned to his wife. Additionally, Mr. Pemberton continued, the Westchester Mansion Trust is terminated. Gerald Henderson has 60 days to vacate the property, which will then be sold with proceeds going to Caitlin Henderson as part of her inheritance. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as an angry shout. "This is insane! You can't just throw us out of our home and leave us with nothing. I've lived in that house my entire adult life." "The house was never yours," Mr. Pemberton replied calmly. "You've been living there as guests of Eleanor Henderson's charity. All credit cards linked to Eleanor's accounts are canceled. As of today," he continued reading, "all family expenses that have been automatically paid from trust accounts, including property taxes, insurance, utilities, and maintenance, are now the responsibility of Gerald Henderson personally." I watched my father's face as he processed what this meant. Without Eleanor's financial support, he would be responsible for maintaining a $10 million property on whatever income he could generate himself. Given his history of financial mismanagement, this was clearly impossible. Linda was doing her own calculations. She had married a man she believed was wealthy only to discover he was essentially a kept man living off his elderly mother's charity. Their entire comfortable lifestyle was about to disappear. There are also some concerning financial irregularities that Eleanor discovered before her death. Mr. Pemberton said, opening the red-ribboned folder. He spread out copies of bank statements, canceled checks, and withdrawal slips across the conference table. The documents showed a pattern of financial activity that made my stomach sink. Between 2020 and Eleanor's death last month, Mr. Pemberton explained, someone has been forging Eleanor's signature on checks and authorizing electronic transfers from her personal accounts without her knowledge or consent. Gerald's face went from gray to green. Marcus started fidgeting in his chair like he wanted to run from the room. The total amount of unauthorized withdrawals is approximately $230,000, Mr. Pemberton continued. Eleanor hired a handwriting expert and a forensic accountant to verify that these signatures were forged. He held up several checks made out to cash, each signed with Eleanor's name, but clearly not in her distinctive handwriting. The signatures were close but not perfect, suggesting someone had been practicing but wasn't skilled enough to create perfect forgeries. Security cameras at Eleanor's bank captured images of the person making these withdrawals. Mr. Pemberton said, producing several printed photographs. The photos clearly showed Marcus at the bank teller window presenting the forged checks and withdrawing cash from Eleanor's accounts. In one image, he was smiling at the teller like he didn't have a care in the world. Marcus Henderson. Mr. Pemberton announced formally, "You have been systematically stealing from your grandmother for the past 3 years." Marcus jumped up from his chair so fast it fell backward. "Those weren't forged. Grandmother gave me permission to help with her banking. She couldn't always get to the bank herself." Eleanor specifically told her bank manager that no one else was authorized to make withdrawals from her accounts. Mr. Pemberton replied. She also left detailed notes about discovering cash missing from her purse and checks missing from her checkbook. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had been taking advantage of an elderly woman's trust and physical limitations to steal money for his own use. The casual way he smiled in the bank photos suggested he felt completely entitled to take whatever he wanted. "The district attorney's office has been notified," Mr. Pemberton announced. "Elder financial abuse is a serious felony in New York State." The room erupted in chaos. Marcus started screaming that he was being set up, that Eleanor had dementia and didn't remember giving him permission. Linda began crying, realizing that her stepson was facing potential prison time. Gerald sat in stunned silence as his entire world collapsed around him. "But Mr. Pemberton wasn't finished destroying my family's illusions. There's also the matter of the unauthorized use of Eleanor's credit cards," he said, producing yet more evidence. The credit card statements showed thousands of dollars in charges at expensive restaurants, clothing stores, electronics retailers, and vacation resorts. All the charges were made by Gerald and Marcus using cards that belonged to Eleanor. Mrs. Henderson discovered that someone had been using her credit cards without permission, Mr. Pemberton explained. She found the cards missing from her purse and later discovered they were being used to fund family expenses and luxury purchases. The statements painted a picture of two men who felt completely entitled to an elderly woman's money. Expensive dinners, designer clothes, electronics, and vacation trips, all charged to Eleanor's accounts without her knowledge. The total unauthorized credit card usage is approximately $110,000, Mr. Pemberton announced. Combined with the forged checks Marcus and Gerald had stolen nearly $350,000 from Eleanor in her final years of life. They had treated her like their personal ATM while she was becoming increasingly frail and vulnerable. Eleanor spent her last months carefully documenting these violations, Mr. Pemberton continued. She hired private investigators to verify the unauthorized transactions and gather evidence for potential criminal prosecution. "I felt sick thinking about Eleanor spending her final months discovering that her son and grandson were stealing from her. The betrayal must have been devastating for a woman who had spent decades supporting their lifestyle." Both Gerald Henderson and Marcus Henderson are facing potential criminal charges for elder financial abuse fraud and theft, Mr. Pemberton announced formally. The evidence has been turned over to the district attorney's office, and warrants may be issued pending their investigation. Linda was crying openly now, her perfect makeup running down her face as she realized she had married into a family of criminals. The elegant life she thought she was living was built on theft and lies. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to control the situation. "Caitlin, you have to help us," he pleaded. "We're family. You can't let them destroy us over some accounting mistakes." But Gerald's response revealed just how deep his sense of entitlement ran. Instead of apologizing or showing remorse, he turned his anger toward Eleanor. "Mother was a spiteful old woman who never appreciated everything I did for her," he snarled. "I sacrificed my own opportunities to take care of her in that house. That money was compensation for years of service." It was exactly the wrong thing to say in a room full of witnesses who would likely be called to testify in any criminal proceedings. The third major twist was becoming crystal clear. Not only had my father and brother been living off Eleanor's charity while treating me like garbage, but they had been actively stealing from her while she was elderly and vulnerable. They weren't just entitled and ungrateful, they were criminals. Mr. Pemberton closed the evidence folders and looked directly at me with an expression that suggested the revelations weren't over yet. "Caitlin," he said, "there are additional assets in Eleanor's estate that haven't been mentioned yet." I couldn't imagine what else there could be. The penthouse alone was more money than I had ever dreamed of having. Eleanor's stock portfolio, managed by Fleming Investment Group, is valued at approximately $14.7 million, he announced. This portfolio includes blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and real estate investment trusts that have been carefully managed for over 30 years. The room went silent again. $14.7 million on top of the $6.3 million penthouse meant I was inheriting over $20 million. There are also 3 rental properties in Brooklyn. Mr. Pemberton continued, currently generating approximately $32,000 per month in rental income. These properties are valued at a combined $4.2 million. My head was spinning with numbers I couldn't fully comprehend. Gerald and Marcus had been stealing hundreds of thousands, while Eleanor possessed assets worth over $25 million. Finally, Mr. Pemberton said there's a business investment portfolio including partial ownership in several successful companies that Eleanor invested in over the years. These holdings are valued at approximately $3.8 million. The total inheritance was approaching $30 million. Eleanor had been extraordinarily wealthy far beyond what any of us had realized. As the primary beneficiary, Mr. Pemberton continued, Caitlin now has legal authority over all of Eleanor's financial accounts and business decisions. This includes the power to decide whether to pursue criminal charges against Gerald and Marcus for their theft. The power dynamic in the room had completely reversed. 30 minutes ago, I had been the family disappointment being pressured to give away my inheritance. Now I was the one holding all the financial and legal power. Gerald and Marcus were facing potential prison time, but only if I chose to cooperate with the prosecution. I could potentially make their legal problems disappear, but I also had every right to ensure they faced consequences for their crimes. Linda was looking at me with desperate hope, suddenly realizing that her comfortable future depended entirely on my mercy. The same woman who had treated me with cold indifference for 20 years was now hanging on my every word. Caitlin, sweetheart. Linda said, her voice shaking. I had no idea about any of this financial situation. I thought Gerald was successful. I thought the money was legitimately his. Please don't let this destroy our family. She was calling me sweetheart for the first time in 2 decades, suddenly claiming me as family now that I controlled the money. Gerald tried a different approach, appealing to my relationship with my deceased mother. Caitlin, your mother would never want our family torn apart like this. Sarah loved Marcus like her own son. She would want you to show compassion and forgiveness. It was manipulative and disgusting using my mother's memory to try to escape consequences for stealing from my mother's trust fund. But Mr. Pemberton had one more surprise that would change everything again. Before we discuss how to proceed, he said there's one final document that Eleanor asked me to give to Caitlin personally. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Eleanor's careful handwriting. The envelope was thick, suggesting a substantial letter inside. Eleanor asked that this letter be read privately. Mr. Pemberton said, but she also indicated that Caitlin should feel free to share its contents if she chooses to do so. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Eleanor's final words to me, written when she knew she was dying and had discovered the full extent of her son's and grandson's betrayal. Should I read this now? I asked. Eleanor hoped you would, Mr. Pemberton replied. She felt the letter would help you understand her decisions and guide your choices about how to proceed. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded several pages of Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. The letter was dated just 6 weeks before her death. My dearest Caitlin, the letter began, and I could hear Eleanor's voice in every word. If you are reading this, then you now know the truth about your father's financial situation and the theft that has been happening in our family. I want you to understand why I made these decisions and what I hope you will do with the power I am giving you. I had to pause because my hands were shaking too badly to continue reading. Eleanor had known she was dying and had used her final weeks to craft a plan that would give me justice and the power to reshape our family dynamic. The fourth major twist was becoming clear. Eleanor hadn't just left me money. She'd left me a detailed explanation of why she was overturning decades of family hierarchy and giving me the power to decide everyone's future. I took a deep breath and continued reading Eleanor's letter aloud, my voice growing stronger as I realized how much thought and love had gone into every word. I have known about your father's gambling problem and financial irresponsibility since your mother, Sarah, became ill, Eleanor had written. Sarah confided in me before her death that she was worried about Gerald's ability to manage money and provide for you properly. The room was completely silent as I read everyone hanging on every word of Eleanor's final testimony. What you don't know, Caitlin, is that your mother, Sarah, was much smarter about money than Gerald ever realized. During her marriage, she secretly saved money from her teaching salary because she suspected Gerald's business ventures were not as successful as he claimed. My mother had been saving money secretly. This was completely new information. Sarah purchased the Manhattan penthouse in 2003, just months before her death, as a future gift for you. She bought it through my legal team to hide it from Gerald's creditors and to ensure he couldn't gamble away your inheritance. I felt tears starting to form as I realized my mother had been protecting me even while she was dying of cancer. The penthouse was Sarah's way of ensuring that no matter what happened with Gerald's finances, you would always have security and independence. She made me promise to hold it in trust until you were mature enough to understand its significance. Gerald's face had gone completely white as he learned that his dead wife had been planning for his financial failures and protecting their daughter from his mistakes. I continued reading Eleanor's careful explanation of everything that had happened after my mother's death. Gerald was deeply in debt when Sarah died, and I paid off those debts to protect you and provide family stability. I bought the Westchester mansion and set up the trust arrangements to give Gerald a chance to rebuild his life, while protecting the family assets from his poor judgment. I had hoped Gerald would mature and become more responsible, but instead he became dependent on my financial support while showing no gratitude or improvement in his character. Linda was crying quietly as she realized that her entire comfortable lifestyle had been built on Eleanor's charity and Gerald's inability to support his family independently. When I discovered that Gerald had stolen your mother's trust fund, Eleanor's letter continued, I realized that he was not just financially irresponsible, but actively harmful to your well-being. He took money that Sarah specifically set aside for your future and used it to fund Marcus's privileged lifestyle. The letter went on to detail Eleanor's discovery of the forged checks and unauthorized credit card usage. Gerald and Marcus began stealing from me directly when they decided my legitimate support wasn't sufficient for their desired lifestyle. They forged my signature and used my credit cards without permission, treating me like their personal bank account. I hired private investigators to document their theft because I realized that legal evidence would be necessary to protect other elderly people from similar abuse. Eleanor had been thinking beyond our family, recognizing that Gerald and Marcus's behavior represented a broader pattern of elder abuse that needed to be stopped. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. What Gerald doesn't know, Eleanor's letter continued, is that I have been aware of his affair during Sarah's cancer treatment. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Gerald had been cheating on my dying mother. I have photographs and documentation of Gerald's relationship with a woman named Patricia Morrison during the final months of Sarah's life. Gerald was planning to leave Sarah for Patricia until Sarah's death made such a dramatic step unnecessary. I felt like I was going to be sick. My father had been planning to abandon my dying mother for another woman. Gerald made a desperate attempt to deny it. That's not true. I never had an affair. Mother was making things up because she was angry about the money. But Eleanor's letter anticipated his denials. I have included copies of hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and private investigator photographs in a separate envelope. Gerald spent money we didn't have on romantic dinners and hotel rooms while his wife was dying of cancer, and his 8-year-old daughter was watching her mother fade away. Mr. Pemberton reached into his briefcase and produced another envelope thick with evidence. The contents would presumably prove that Gerald had been betraying our family on multiple levels during the worst period of our lives. Eleanor's letter continued with her instructions for how I should handle this information. Caitlin, I am giving you this evidence and this inheritance not for revenge, but for justice. You deserve to know the truth about your father's character, and you deserve to have the financial security that your mother tried to provide for you. You now have the power to decide Gerald's and Marcus's future. You can choose to pursue criminal charges, or you can choose mercy with conditions. Either choice is valid, but I hope you will make decisions based on protecting yourself and other potential victims, rather than maintaining family peace. The letter concluded with Eleanor's hopes for my future. Use this inheritance to build a life that honors your mother's memory and your own talents. You are stronger and more capable than Gerald ever gave you credit for, and you deserve happiness and security. Sarah would be so proud of the woman you have become, despite the obstacles Gerald created for you. This money represents both Sarah's love and my own attempt to restore the justice that has been denied to you for so long. I finished reading and looked around the room at my family's shocked faces. Eleanor's letter had revealed not just financial crimes, but a pattern of betrayal that went back over 20 years. Gerald had stolen from his dying wife's daughter, cheated on his dying wife, lived off his mother's charity while showing no gratitude, and then graduated to directly stealing from his elderly mother when her legitimate generosity wasn't enough. Marcus had grown up entitled and spoiled, contributing nothing to society, while stealing from the grandmother who had funded his entire comfortable existence. Linda had unknowingly married a man whose wealth was entirely fictional, a man who had been living as a dependent while pretending to be successful. The fifth major twist was complete. Eleanor hadn't just given me an inheritance. She had given me the complete truth about my family's real character and the power to decide what justice looked like. I carefully folded Eleanor's letter and placed it back in the envelope, taking a moment to process everything I had learned. The room remained silent, everyone waiting to see how I would use the power that had just been placed in my hands. Looking around the table, I saw 3 people whose entire comfortable existence depended on decisions I was about to make. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards. Gerald, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You slapped me in front of 12 witnesses less than an hour ago. You demanded that I give away my inheritance to benefit the brother you favored my entire life. You stole my mother's trust fund and spent it on Marcus while I worked 3 jobs to pay for college. Gerald opened his mouth to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished, I continued. You cheated on my dying mother. You stole from Eleanor while she was elderly and vulnerable. You've built your entire adult life on other people's money while contributing nothing of value yourself. Gerald's face was red with anger, but he seemed to recognize that any outburst would only make his situation worse. Marcus. I turned to address my brother. You've never held a real job in your 32 years of life. You've lived in a mansion that didn't belong to your father, attended expensive schools paid for with stolen money, and when that wasn't enough, you started forging our grandmother's signature to steal directly from her accounts. Marcus squirmed in his chair like a child being scolded. Caitlin, I'm sorry about everything. I didn't realize the money situation was so complicated. I thought grandmother wanted us to have whatever we needed. You thought a 90-year-old woman wanted you to forge her signature and steal her money, I replied. Or you thought you were entitled to take whatever you wanted because you've never been told no in your entire life. Linda was watching this exchange with growing panic, realizing that her comfortable future hung entirely on my mercy. Linda. I said, turning to my stepmother, "You treated me with coldness and dismissal for 20 years. You made it clear that I was an unwelcome reminder of Gerald's previous marriage. You never once stood up for me when Gerald showed favoritism toward Marcus." Linda's perfectly styled facade was cracking. "Caitlin, I know I haven't been the best stepmother. I was young when I married your father, and I didn't know how to handle the situation. But we're family, and family should stick together." "We're family when it's convenient for you," I replied. "When you thought Gerald had money and I was just his disappointment daughter. Now that the situation is reversed, suddenly you want to talk about family loyalty." I stood up and walked to the conference room windows looking out at Manhattan while I considered my options. Behind me, I could hear nervous shifting and whispered conversations as my family tried to figure out what I was planning. Mr. Pemberton broke the silence. "Caitlin, what would you like to do about the criminal evidence? The district attorney's office is waiting for your decision about whether to proceed with charges." This was the moment of truth. I had the power to send Gerald and Marcus to prison, or I could choose a different path. Eleanor's letter had emphasized justice over revenge, but she had also made it clear that protecting other potential victims was important. I turned back to face the room and pulled out my phone. "Before I make any decisions about criminal charges," I said, "I want everyone to know that I've been recording this entire will reading on my phone." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gerald jumped up from his chair. "You can't do that. This is a private family meeting." "Actually," Mr. Pemberton interjected, "New York is a one-party consent state for recording. Caitlin has every right to record conversations she's participating in." "I have Gerald's admission that he used my mother's trust fund for family expenses," I continued. "I have his physical assault on me in front of witnesses. I have his attempts to manipulate me using my mother's memory. All of this is documented." Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. "Caitlin, please, you're my sister. We can work this out privately." "I'm your sister when you need something," I replied. "But I wasn't your sister when you were enjoying the expensive education that my mother's money paid for. I wasn't your sister when you were living in luxury while I was eating ramen noodles and working multiple jobs." I had made my decision about how to proceed, but I wanted to give my family one final chance to understand the gravity of their situation. "Here's what's going to happen," I announced. "Gerald and Marcus, you have exactly one opportunity to avoid criminal prosecution. You will agree to specific conditions, and if you violate those conditions even once, I will immediately turn this recording and all of Eleanor's evidence over to the district attorney." Gerald and Marcus exchanged panicked glances, realizing that their freedom depended entirely on terms I was about to set. "First," I said, "both of you will attend financial counseling and therapy. You will provide proof of attendance, and you will complete any programs recommended by licensed professionals. Second, you will both find legitimate employment within 6 months. Not businesses funded by family money, not get-rich-quick schemes, but actual jobs with actual employers who pay you for actual work. Third, you will never contact me again unless I specifically invite you to do so. No phone calls, no emails, no showing up at my home or workplace. I am removing both of you from my life permanently." The sixth major twist was my realization that I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom. Freedom from their manipulation, their entitlement, and their constant drama. "If you agree to these terms," I continued, "I will provide you with a modest monthly allowance for basic living expenses, enough to rent a decent apartment and buy groceries, but nothing approaching your current lifestyle." "And if we don't agree?" Gerald asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. I held up my phone with its audio recording. "Then I submit this evidence to the district attorney's office and you both go to prison for elder abuse and fraud. The choice was simple. Accept my terms and maintain your freedom or face the criminal justice system and likely spend the next several years in prison." Gerald and Marcus huddled together in desperate whispered conversation, while Linda sat frozen, realizing that her entire comfortable world was about to disappear regardless of their decision. Mr. Pemberton organized his files with professional calm, having witnessed many family destructions over his decades of estate law practice. After 10 minutes of frantic discussion, Gerald straightened up with the defeated posture of a man who knew he had no good options left. "We accept your terms," he said quietly. "Financial counseling, therapy, legitimate employment, no contact. We'll do whatever you require." Marcus nodded miserably beside him, looking like a child who had just learned that actions have consequences. "Linda," I said, turning to my stepmother, "you have a choice to make. You can stay married to Gerald knowing his true financial situation, or you can file for divorce and start over independently." Linda wiped away her ruined makeup and looked at Gerald with an expression that might have been pity or disgust. 20 years, she said softly. 20 years I thought I was married to a successful businessman. I can provide you with a settlement to help you transition to independence, I offered. Enough to get your own apartment, maybe start the business you used to talk about before you married Gerald. Linda had once mentioned wanting to open a small boutique, but she had abandoned that dream when she married into what she thought was wealth. "You would do that for me?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "You were deceived too," I replied. "You married Gerald believing he was financially successful. You deserve a chance to build an honest life for yourself." Mr. Pemberton had been quietly preparing legal documents during our negotiations. "I'll need to formalize these agreements," he said, "written contracts specifying the terms and conditions signed by all parties." Over the next hour, we worked out the specific details. Gerald and Marcus would vacate the Westchester mansion within 60 days and move into a modest apartment that I would help them secure. They would receive $2,000 per month in combined living expenses, contingent on their compliance with therapy and employment requirements. Linda would receive a one-time settlement of $100,000 to help her divorce Gerald and start fresh. It was generous given how she had treated me, but I recognized that she had also been a victim of Gerald's deception. The rental properties in Brooklyn would be managed by a professional property management company, ensuring steady income without requiring my direct involvement. The stock portfolio would continue being managed by Eleanor's investment firm, which had proven their competence over 30 years. "What about the criminal charges?" Mr. Pemberton asked. "I want the evidence documented and filed with the district attorney's office," I decided. "But I'll request that charges be held in abeyance pending Gerald's and Marcus's compliance with our agreement. If they violate the terms, prosecution can proceed immediately." This arrangement would protect other potential elderly victims by creating a legal record of Gerald's and Marcus's crimes, while giving them a chance to rebuild their lives legitimately. "The Manhattan penthouse?" Mr. Pemberton inquired. "I'll move there next month," I said, feeling a surge of excitement about starting fresh in the city where my mother had planned for my future. As the legal documents were signed and notarized, I felt a profound sense of closure. Eleanor and my mother Sarah had spent years planning this moment, ensuring that I would eventually have the resources and knowledge necessary to break free from a toxic family dynamic. 3 months later, I was settling into my new life in Manhattan. The penthouse was everything my mother could have hoped for: spacious, elegant, with stunning views of Central Park. I had expanded my architectural engineering firm, taking on larger and more interesting projects now that I had the financial security to be selective about clients. Gerald and Marcus were living in a small apartment in Queens, both attending court-mandated therapy and working entry-level jobs for the first time in their adult lives. Gerald had found work as a sales associate at a furniture store. Marcus was learning basic computer skills at a temp agency. The adjustment was difficult, but they were learning valuable lessons about self-sufficiency and personal responsibility. Linda had indeed filed for divorce and used her settlement to open a small boutique in Westchester. The business was modest but successful, and she seemed genuinely happy to be building something of her own for the first time in decades. I used part of Eleanor's inheritance to establish the Sarah Henderson Memorial Scholarship Fund, providing financial support for young women pursuing careers in science technology, engineering, and mathematics. The scholarship specifically targeted students from single-parent households, honoring my mother's memory while helping others overcome the kind of obstacles I had faced. The fund's first recipient was Maria Santos, whose mother worked 2 jobs to support her family, while Maria excelled in her engineering studies. Presenting Maria with her scholarship check reminded me that Eleanor's generosity could continue helping people long after her death. 6 months after the will reading, I received a letter from Marcus. He was working full-time now, attending therapy twice a week and slowly learning to manage money responsibly. His letter included a genuine apology for years of entitled behavior and acknowledgement that the stolen money should have been mine all along. Gerald's transformation was less dramatic but still meaningful. His gambling addiction was being addressed through counseling, and the structure of regular employment seemed to provide stability. He had been lacking for decades. He would never be wealthy again, but he was learning to live within his means and contribute productively to society. The most satisfying part of my new life was the sense of alignment between my actions and my values. I was using my inheritance to build something meaningful, expanding my business, supporting education, and creating opportunities for other women to achieve financial independence. Every morning when I looked out at the Manhattan skyline from the windows of my penthouse, I thought about my mother, Sarah, and grandmother, Eleanor. They had both recognized that true inheritance isn't just money, but wisdom, strength, and the courage to demand respect. Eleanor's final gift wasn't just financial security. It was the knowledge that I deserved better treatment and the power to enforce that standard. She had taught me that family is defined by love and respect, not by blood relations or obligation. My new life proved that sometimes the greatest act of family loyalty is refusing to enable destructive behavior. By setting boundaries and demanding accountability, I had given Gerald and Marcus the opportunity to become better people while protecting myself from further abuse. The inheritance had restored the justice that my mother had tried to provide and that Eleanor had carefully preserved. But more importantly, it had given me the freedom to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation or financial dependency. Sometimes the people who truly love you are the ones who prepare you for independence rather than dependence. Eleanor and Sarah had spent years ensuring that I would eventually have both the resources and the wisdom to create a life of dignity and purpose. Now I wake up every day knowing that I have the power to choose who belongs in my life and how I want to be treated. That knowledge, more than any amount of money, represents the true value of my inheritance. Have you ever discovered that your family's financial situation was completely different from what you believed growing up? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most shocking revelations lead to the most positive changes in our lives. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more family drama stories, and share it with anyone who might need to hear about the importance of setting boundaries with toxic family members. Thank you for watching, and remember that you always deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of your family dynamics.